So hey there fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here again. So I'm out in the backcountry today and I want to show you guys a solar powered water system that I've developed that's kind of designed to be portable. You can just throw it in the back of the truck and take it wherever. And so what I'll do is I'll set up all the different components and walk through things as I go and give you a detailed description of exactly how I put it all together, yeah? So if you're interested in, you know, off-grid water systems and that kind of thing, stay tuned. So the first thing I'm going to kind of go through is this Coleman Camp Kitchen. Now you can buy these at Canadian Tire, or I know when you're down in the States, I don't know, the typical hardware stores and those types of things. You know, they're not that unusual to find to buy. But when it comes to some of the components I've added in here, they're not part of the kit. They're just additional add-ons that I've done, but I'll kind of talk about those as I go. So the first order of business is, as you can see, it's a little portable unit that you can kind of carry in your hand. I'm just going to pop that open now and pull out some of the separate components that exist in here. There's some meshing there, and we've got some of the poles, and I've got other little components which I'll talk about in detail as we go. So the first order of business I want to do is kind of just set up my table. So as you can see, you just pull out the legs. It's fairly straightforward. It's got little clips on the side where you can just clip things in to lock them. So I'll just lock those in place now. And now to give it a bit of additional height, it's got some leg extensions and that kind of thing that come with it. There's a few different varieties of camp kitchens you can buy, and I find they're kind of all within reason, have the same kind of things that they offer, but I don't really consider them to be a full kitchen in the classical sense of the term, because quite often they don't come with the sinks and other things that you would have in a kitchen, right? So that's kind of some of the stuff I'll be covering in this video, but I'm just going to turn around and put in the leg extensions. As you can see, fairly straightforward. Just gives me a basic table now, kind of lifts me up. Now there's a couple little sets that sit on this side. I'm just going to flip those around and have them face the opposite direction for the example in the video. And I'll kind of shift camera angles and go in now on a different angle and kind of walk through the additional components to kind of building this out, yeah? So some of the other additional components that this kit comes with are little bars, and like I said, there was little kind of spots I can set those into on this backside, and all it really is just like a little metal hole that you can drive these little sticks into, or poles into, if you will. Now they've got little hooks on them now. In fact, I want to have this face the opposite direction, so we'll just pop those off for a second. And you can see it all kind of comes apart and goes together pretty easily. But needless to say, just set in those metal rods into their little slots. Now I've got hooks on here where I can hang different individual components, like, you know, a frying pan or a cup or that kind of stuff, and you'll see that as we go further on. Now this little component here really is designed to give you a pole that it sits over top of the entire setup, and it's got two little pins. Make sure I'm getting this on the camera okay. It's got two little pins on it, and there's little holes on the back of the table that I can just slot that into, and I'll show you that in a second, yeah? But it simply just pops into those holes and kind of locks into place. Fairly elementary, there's not much to it. And then the rod just connects in, and it allows me now to hook a little lamp. Make sure I'm on camera okay with that. It might be too low, yeah. So up on the top part of this pole, there's a little thing that I can kind of hang a lamp on, or that kind of thing, yeah. So needless to say, I'll shift camera angles and I'll show you how this pole just connects to the table. So like I say, I'll give you a close-up of this in detail. So these two little rivet points, if you will, and there's some little slots here. You simply just kind of put them in and set them down. It's really elementary, and then it just kind of locks this pole onto the table, yeah? So not much to it, but I'll step back and start to move on with the rest of the assembly, yeah? Okay, so now for the next step in the process, got this kind of collapsible structure here where it opens up, you just flip it over, And there's little holes that little nubs kind of set into, and you just kind of put them in, set them down. It gives you this kind of raised table setup, if you will. And then there's little clasps that click in on the side of the table here. And like I say, I'll shift camera angles again here and do a close-up of that, show you exactly how these kind of interconnect, yeah? So hopefully the camera gives this justice, but you can see there's little nubs. Let's see if I can get that on camera properly. There's little nubs that sit right here, and they just plug into little holes. It's really elementary. And then there's little kind of clasp parts here, and they just kind of click into the leg of the table. And then do that in the front and then the back, and everything's kind of locked in place now. And it allows you to kind of get ready to set up the expansion, where in this specific scenario I'm going to add on a sink and other components, yeah? So I'll shift over to that as the next step and going to walk through that part as well. So 2 additional components that come with this kit now have these bars with little foam padding on the top, and on the underside of them they've just got little kind of C clasp where you can screw it on and bolt onto the bars, yeah? So I'm just going to turn around and set the first one in place here. Make sure it's unscrewed long enough to easily sit on there nice and flat. And now it's kind of set in place. I just screw them on and it locks everything down, yeah? And in fact, just to make sure everything's nice and square, I'm just going to slide it right up against where it connects to the table now. And just kind of tighten those off a bit, just to make sure that they don't slip and slide out of there at all. And it's really that elementary. That component is now locked on there. So now I'm just going to grab the wood that I'm going to use as my countertop, if you will. Now, the way I've designed this piece of wood is to have some swivels on it so that it can collapse a little further. I'm probably going to be, you're actually seeing this project as it's part of being developed out, so this is kind of sneak peek, but it's already at a good enough level to kind of show to the public, if you will. But I plan on doing another slit along here and putting another hinge in, so this can all compact down and be really small when I go to make it transported. And it's got a hose that sits into it, and you'll see why this hose is all in there in a minute. But in essence, I just turn around and set that on top of this surface now, and my sink will set down into there. And then the thinking really is, I just take this other bar, make sure it's loosened up, and set that down. And I'm going to push this bar now against this wood and kind of make sure that there's a half decent amount of tension being pressed against the side so that this board isn't going to slip or move anywhere. So I'm just going to set that in, apply the screws to give it some tension, do the same on this side. Like I say, I just kind of press it that way to apply tension. Screw in my screws. I'm going to lock that countertop in place now. And like I said, it's got a little hose sticking out here, and that hose kind of runs out to the bottom. And I'll show all how that sets up in 2 seconds, yeah? So I'll go grab the sink, we'll drop that in as the next step, and kind of keep progressing as we go through. Alright, so a couple videos ago, I showed a detail of exactly how to build out this camp kitchen sink. So if you've watched previous videos of mine and you know you've seen it, then you know exactly how this mechanism was built out. It's really just a modified salad bowl with some plumbing components that allows that to be. So if you want to know the full details of exactly how that's built out, like I say, there's videos that sit up on my channel that describe that in full detail, yeah? But I'm just going to turn around and screw on a garden hose now to the end of that, and this is really going to be my drainage that kind of drains off any of the water that's been stored. And I'm just going to feed that hose down now through the opening and set my sink directly into there. And then when it comes to the hose pipe, just going to kind of pull that down. Gotta straighten this out a bit there, and like I say, the hose is really just there to give drainage off from this system, yeah? But as you can see, now I've got a full functioning sink kind of set into play. There's not much to it. The wooden circle that I cut out, I've got to redo this board. I did poor jigsaw work on it, but I plan on putting a rubber like garden hose around the outside edge and having it where you can set that on top to have it be kind of additional counter space when you're not using the sink. But that's kind of part of the future development of this project. But now I'm going to move on to, now that we've got the sink in place, I'm going to move on to, all right, let's get the water system hooked up so that we can start getting water flowing into this. The next part of the process, I've just got this, you know, classic water jug that you'd pick up just about anywhere, if you will. I'll just throw that in there for a second. And this is going to be my water storage that's going to drive off to the sink. So I'm going to take that hose that I had now, that's kind of coming off, and that's simply just going to feed now. And I should show the end of this hose to show you exactly what I've done there. In essence, I've just cut it to be spiky on the end of the hose. Make sure that if it ever sits flat down to the bottom of the container, it never dry locks, if you will. That there's always the water's always going to be able to flow into that. But it's going to be really as simple as just that hose is now going to drop down into this container, and that feeds out to right here. There's just a little hole drilled where that hose feeds through, and that's really going to be my water supply and how it gets to the sink. Yeah, so there's not a lot of complexity to that, but like I say, I'll pull the hose back out and show you the detail of exactly what I did to the end of the hose just to kind of stop any dry lock. So let me shift camera angles and I'll show you that now. Yeah, so like I say, you can see the hose just feeds right through this piece of wood, comes down and just runs directly into the water tank. Nothing to it, but I'll just pull that hose back out for a second and show you this end, try to get that in a good close-up where I've kind of sawtoothed the end of the hose. Hopefully the camera's picking that up okay, just to make it that water will end up flowing in one way or the other. Yeah, so just a little minor detail, but I had it once where the hose was sitting perfectly lined up down to the bottom of it, and like I say, the water stopped flowing because it got locked by the pressure of the suction. So that just helped stop that from happening in any way, shape or form. So needless to say, the next step now will be to just hook the faucet on to this component, and that way we can confirm that water can be drawn up and we can just use the sink on demand on the fly. Yeah, okay, so for the faucet is the next part of this step. This is a USB based water faucet. Now these are designed to use on like water bottles, where you can set this up. This really just caps onto the top of your water bottle at home, and you press the button and you can either have 600 milliliters of water kind of pre-measured that comes out, or you can just turn it on and off and just have the faucet run on demand. And then I just left the cable on to show you here, where you can plug this in USB to recharge the lithium-ion battery that exists in there, and you can leave this hardwired into, say, a solar generator that you had set up if you wanted to ensure that, you know, this thing was able to last for years and years without issue. So needless to say, on the bottom here there's a little hole, and all we really have to do in this scenario is this hose that came out. I'm just gonna turn around and pull that hose up a tiny bit, make sure I set it onto the hole that exists on the faucet, and then kind of, when I know that that's nice and snug on there, which I believe it is now, I can just pull that hose back down a bit and then set that flush, and it just locks now onto the wooden board. And like I said, the power line can come off and run away from the water supply, so you know, you're not worried too much about the electrical interfering with the water supply, but where you can have this thing sitting on constant charge from a solar generator off-grid setup. But it's really now, I'll just make sure this is locked, it's really now just as simple as I've got a running water supply that's on demand and controllable. So hopefully I'll just see if that pans up a bit. Now, the water intake into the system, I don't want to be having to run down to the creek every day to turn around, and you can see I can just run that on demand and it'll just keep going until I press stop. Or I can turn around, I know I'll cut back to the water intake business, but or you can turn around and just hit the 600 milliliters. It'll run enough to, here, let me just grab a cup here. I wouldn't mind having a little water off scene either way. But when you hit the 600 milliliter one, it'll just run until it disperses 600 milliliters of water. And then it'll automatically shut itself off, yeah? As you can see, I didn't have to press the button or anything. Automatically shut itself off. And now I know that the water that's in that container is potable currently, so I'm not worried about drinking out of it. But I'm going to show the next step now where, okay, this is fine and dandy. This gives you the ability to kind of have a functioning sink, you know, when you're off grid, that you can, you know, clean yourself up and that kind of stuff, or all that kind of shenanigans. But it gives you a cold water supply on demand. Now, like I said, I don't want to have it where I'm running down to the creek to fill up that large blue container that I've got sitting here. I don't want to be having to go to the creek to fill that up all the time. So I'm going to show you the kind of intake setup, and then I'll discuss the water purification that you can easily do to that, which I've shown in previous videos using hypochlorous acid. But the first order of business is let's show the water intake setup from the creek and into that blue bin, yeah? So now as part of the next setup, I'm going to want to run a water pump that supplies water from the creek up into this, you know, blue bin container that I've got sitting here. So I've shown this solar generator in previous builds, and it's got a cigarette lighter adapter connected onto it, and needless to say, in the cardboard box I've got above it, I've got a 80-watt solar panel. So the thinking really is we're going to use the solar to throw power into the solar generator, and then that solar generator is going to be what powers the water pump that drives the water back up and to this blue container, yeah? So first order business, let me just set up the basic setup of this solar generator. So I just deboxed the 80-watt solar panel that I had here. As you can see, light enough, I can carry it in one hand, but it produces 80 watts worth of power in full sunshine, and the water pump I'm using is 65 watts, so I potentially could run that water pump directly off the solar panel without any battery involvement, and I'll show an example of that a little later on in this video. But you can only run that when there's full direct sunlight on it to ensure that the pump is supplying power. But it does allow you, if you know you're in a good bright sunny location where you get frequent days with the sunshine, to run the water from the creek up to your storage containers without any batteries involved. In the setup I'm doing, because that's in the middle of winter time and I'm not in great sun right now, it's fairly overcast. It was supposed to be a sunny day and I was hoping to show a better example of this, but such is life. But either way, it's got MC4 connectors that sit onto the back of these solar panels. And now, if you've seen previous videos of mine, you'll have seen this solar generator where I've got the ability to take in solar panels sitting on this line. And all I'm simply going to do is turn around and plug the solar panels that sit here directly into my solar generator. And there's not much to it really. There's a male and a female. I just plug them together, do the same on the other connection, and that's set up and connected now. And this gives me the ability to power up that solar generator as I move through time. It's a really elementary setup. There's not much to it, yeah? But like I said, I'll use this as the core of my power construct to drive my water pumps and those kinds of things. So either way, these are all waterproof, and it's got sealed, you know, covers that go on everything. So it's good. This can be out in kind of all types of weather, and I can, you know, be out in the pouring rain without being concerned, yeah? But either way, let's move on to the water pump. Okay, so what I have here is my water pump system. Now this is really designed, you can buy these on eBay or Amazon, that kind of thing. They're only about $45, $50, relatively cheap units. But the thinking really is they're designed to be pressure wash sprayers for, you know, spraying down your car and that kind of thing. But with the power consumption and the way that these work, these are ideally suited for this kind of off-grid setup. So it's got a DC power plug that goes into a cigarette lighter adapter with a little on-off switch that sits here that feeds off to the DC motor itself, and that motor has an intake, which is the clear line here, and that's the line that'll go off and dump into the creek. And then the black line running off this hosing turns around and will feed into my blue container. So I'll kind of stop and show detailed view of this so you guys can see all of the specific individual components, and then we'll set it up in the creek and start to get it going, yeah? So getting good cameras on this is always a tricky business when you're out in the field, but such is life, right? So needless to say, the main component now will be this 12-volt motor. And I'll bring this up close and kind of show you the specs on that, because there's people who want to see that. So it's 12 volt, 6.7 amps. It's an 80 watt. It pumps 6.5 liters a minute. You know, that's the rating of these things. And then when it comes to on the handle itself, it's got a little on-off switch, so I can just turn things on and off, which feeds into a cigarette lighter adapter. And that really just is what powers this thing to turn on and off as we go through time, yeah? And so that'll just plug directly into the solar generator. And then there's this component now at the end of the hose, in order to kind of filter out some of the debris that sits in the river and that kind of stuff, because you don't want to be getting it into your water supply. There's this little plastic component that sits on here, and it's got like a screen mesh, and it just stops any large particulate to get in there. I'm debating on whether I'm gonna wrap that additionally in a bandana to stop finer stuff, because the thinking really is this will be just kind of a quasi filter for me on the fly as I go, where as long as I'm not pulling from water supplies that are, you know, too murky, I should only have to worry about the disinfecting part of the water, not the filtering part. For people that are familiar with processing water to make it drinkable and all that kind of stuff, hopefully that's all familiar terrain to you. But either way, this has got a fairly long line now that sits on there that will just run off and feed into the creek. And then, like I say, on the other end now, there's just a quick connect, nipple connection that sits on here, and it allows it to just pop this on and off. Now, I know there's different types of water pumps and that kind of stuff that exist out in the world. There's plenty of those things. And why I would go with one of these, then, you know, people might be asking, because you can get pumps that automatically turn on and off and all that kind of stuff when they see the water levels, blah, blah, blah. But when you're out in the field, one of the good parts about this, and I plan on talking about it in future videos, because I want to show beyond just the sink setup, I'm going to show doing laundry, having toilets, the full kitchen, everything, all portable that you could throw into the back of a vehicle that weighs less than 50 pounds. But I know that this water system itself was complex enough, I just thought I'd break it off into a separate video. But it's really handy to have this sprayer if I need to spray down toilets and those types of things later on in time without having to get my hands involved, if you will. And so it just became multi-function in that regard, where I was willing to sacrifice this motor automatically turning itself on and off like a bilge pump or that kind of thing would, you know, similar technology to that. It was worth sacrificing that and having the manual switch on there to me, because I know that filling up my water container is something that is only going to happen every, you know, day or 2 or 3 days. You know, it's not something that constantly needs to be running. So I don't have to have this setup, you know, live and under load of power constantly. It's really periodically being used, and it's to help cut down the work of having to haul the water from the creeks and lakes, those types of things that you're pulling your water supply from, up to your camp. You know, of these hose lengths that are sitting here, I've got about 30 or 40 foot of hose here, and I plan on expanding that. So if I'm camping anywhere within 100 foot of a river, that I'll be able to just have an on-demand water supply into my camp without ever having to go down to the creek and grab buckets and bring it back to camp and all that kind of shenanigans, yeah? So needless to say, I'll stretch all this out a bit to give it some length and set it up, and you guys can see this fully functioning, yeah? Okay, so I've kind of stretched out the line now, where I've got the intake hose sitting down into the water. Hopefully the camera's picking that up okay. And then I just ran the line out where the pump is actually sitting underneath the solar panel to give it a bit of waterproofing. And I'll show a close-up of all that in a second, but as you can see, the pump is kind of nestled in underneath just to keep it out of the elements. And then the output hose runs off right over to my blue container. Now, I want to expand this hosing, like I was saying earlier. I want to have this where I can run that as maximum length as I possibly can. So when I'm out near rivers and creeks and lakes and those types of things, I could drive the water from those locations into my camp at a half decent distance. But I'm just going to come back to the generator itself now. Kind of trying to do this as elegantly on camera as I can, but we'll see. how this all flows. But now with the solar generator, I'm just going to pop that on now. The blue light lights up, lets me know it's working. And if you've seen this in previous videos, you know that it's got USB and 12-volt adapter plugs that sit onto here. So I'm just going to plug my water pump now directly into the 12-volt adapter. And I can see the lights lit up here. I'll just stop and shift camera angles and zoom in, and then we'll just kick it on with the on-off switch right here, yeah? So let me shift camera angles. So there we go. A little more up close. Hopefully you can see on the camera where it's 13.3 on the battery, 13.3 volts. So the battery's, you know, not totally full, but it's pretty full. And you can see the little red light lights up to let me know that this pump is working, yeah? So now all I have to do is flip this switch on and off. So the pump is running now. You can hear it's really quiet. It barely makes any noise at all. Now I'll shift back over to the blue container, our water store, and we'll show you the pressure and stuff that it puts out, yeah? All right, it's now back at the water intake. We've just got the, you know, hose head, if you will, and try to catch this on camera well. You can see solid pressure. And that's one of the reasons why I think I can run this to, you know, a longer length than the hose without it causing any issues. But you know, it becomes as simple as just, all right, fill up your container. Like I said, that's all just feeding straight off the creek, right? Saves the energy of having to move the weight of the water every day. It can become tiresome, right? If you're wanting to haul water supplies from the, you know, water zone of the river, the creek, lake, that kind of thing, up to your camp, you know, water's, I think, something like 5 or 10 pounds a gallon. You know, it's heavy. And when you're doing that day after day after day, that's taking calories out of you, it's taking energy out of you, that kind of thing, right? But as you can see, really simple. I walk back down, turn the power off on my pump, and I'm back to the races where I'm not pulling any energy off that, you know. And like I say, I'm in the scenario where I can still run this fountain water and be filling that all up all at the same time, that kind of stuff, right? You can have both systems feeding independently because they are, you know, 100% in that regard. But yeah, that hopefully gives you an idea of the water supply from the source right up into the sink, yeah? So I'm going to shift camera angles, show you kind of, I'll pan back and show you the larger view of it, and then I'll show you some of the different modifications and add-ons that I can do to this kitchen to really bring it up to speed to be more useful and, you know, more creature comforts and those types of things, yeah? Like I say, I never know how to give these things justice to show the size and scope of things, but as you can see, there's the base kitchen setup, and then the hose runs off to the solar generator setup, which then feeds off to the intake out to the water. You know, and when it comes to running this line up a, you know, gradient, if you will, of how many feet up can I get the water to go while it still flows, when it comes to that, in the testing I've done already, I've already had it where I was able to have water sitting down on my first floor in my home, and it was easily able to pump the water through that 12-volt pump. It was easily able to pump the water up to the second floor, you know, right up the stairs and all that kind of stuff, just as testing. I didn't do any recordings of that, but, you know, I wanted to test how far up from a water supply can I pump that water and that kind of thing, right? So, and it still had pretty well the same amount of pressure that I showed you earlier in the video, you know, when it comes to the water pressure. So I believe that if I want to sacrifice, I'm not really a plumber or anything, right? But if I want to sacrifice some of the lift ability that that pump can do, hopefully I'll be able to gain some of the distance. And like I say, when it comes to the water pressure itself, you know, that water is shooting, here I'll pan up, that water's shooting a good 10-15 foot spray. So there's lots of water pressure that sits into there right now, right? Now, I'm not overly concerned in that regard. Of my primary objective is really be able to get that blue container filled without me having to put forth the labor of going down to the creek or the lake or the river all the time to fill it up. That just becomes a lot of work. So what I'll do now is stop shift camera angles and show you some of the other add-ons I've done to this kitchen to help kind of boost its functionality beyond what you've seen so far. The sprayer even has a little clip on it where I can set it up to be hands-free and just let it fill things, right? I don't have to stand there squeezing the handle. Just as a side note, you know, the water right now is only about half full in here, and I've drank out of this creek many times. I've been here lots in the past. I've drank out of it many times without a filter in the past, so I'm not overly concerned about any water pathogens or any of that business from this location. But if I was, I'll talk about that further in the video. But if I was, we have simple ways to be able to remedy that kind of stuff as well, yeah? But either way, let's get on to the other gizmotology I can strap onto this kitchen. Makes it really just awesome. All right, so like I say, even already at this level, to me to have a counter spot and a place to hang things and a place where I can set up a light and that kind of thing, and having a on-demand faucet and all that kind of stuff already makes this a great setup. It's really good in that regard. But if I pop off this pole that holds the light, I've got this unit. Now I'm just going to slide that over there for a second. And I've got this unit, and I'll stop and show this up close a little bit. So this is designed and used by hunters that go up into trees to be able to clamp onto a tree and set up a little table and a little place to kind of hold a bit of gear in that regard. Hopefully the camera's giving that justice. So, but needless to say, I thought this was fantastic for a little unit to be able to hold on to a cleaning rag and, you know, my steel cup that's sitting on the table there, and a bar of soap and that kind of stuff, right? To turn it into more creature comforts for the kitchen. So the thinking really is there's a bar here that I can pop out. I'm really trying to keep this on camera half decent, but there's a bar here that I can just unscrew this, and this component now pops out. I can hook that onto a pipe or any of that business right here, slide this back on, and lock it down with the pin. So I'm just going to do that now to the aluminum I just slid onto the pole, yeah? So when it comes to, and this was really, I put on this additional piece of aluminum here, really just to protect the kitchen gear so it didn't do any damage to it at all. So, and the thinking really is, I just slide that pin in, and it's got the little screw. I can just screw that in, and it locks this little stand. Now there's another screw on this side where I can tighten things and lock it, but this is designed to pivot on different angles and everything else, because it's really meant to be used, you know, up in a tree when you're hunting and you just want to have a little ledge that you can kind of put stuff on. But either way, in my scenario, I see it as being, hey, this is an ideal little swing handle that I can use to, like I say, put my cups into, or I'll just grab a rag that I have here. And I know I don't have this kitchen on the most clean setup in the world, but needless to say, it allows it where I can hang rags and all that kind of stuff, you know, to keep them as a location just off to their own, and have it set up where that stuff is all on a swing arm that I can swing it out of the way of my sink if I want, and just kind of have it cleanly set, yeah? So I'll show a close-up of that now, yeah? So hopefully the camera angle gives it justice, but yeah, it's just a little hook here, and this can swivel so I can pack it all up nice and flat and that kind of thing. And it just gives me an area where if I want to hang a rag or that kind of stuff, right, and have it where I can set a bar of soap or any of that kind of stuff. It's just a little add-on I can do to the kitchen setup that allows me to kind of pivot this, and if I tighten that off a bit better, it'll lock that a little more firmly. But as you can see, it just kind of gives me another surface that I can work with to keep my soap and rags and cups that I'm going to drink out of, or toothbrushes and that kind of stuff, up and out of the way, so I'm saving space of the limited real estate that I do have on the counter, yeah? Okay, so, and then a few of the other kind of components that exist. Now this mesh comes with the table kitchen setup, whereas this mesh is an add-on that I'm doing separate, yeah? So I'll just set that to the top to begin with. Now, on this table, there's a few different little holes that exist down on the table legs themselves, and you simply just hook little hook rings into the holes that are on those legs, and it just locks it into place. And it gives you the ability to set up like a little drying mesh rack, if you will, that you can kind of set things on. I'll just hook it onto there for simplicity's sake, because it's only the example. And hook that one out to the side. So you can see, kind of create a little mesh there that allows me to set items on to dry and saves room on the countertop. But then I grabbed this cargo mesh, which I just picked up at my local dollar store, and I can use this as well to kind of hook into this whole setup, where I simply hook the one clip onto the one side, and then over on the other side I can just hook onto there. Now this allows me to have lots and lots of storage space and space to kind of set things to dry, you know, as a dry rack or that kind of stuff. And it's easy enough with the little tightening piece here that kind of locks down the sink board, where it can help support heavier weights. So I'll just drop in this wood as an example, because it's fairly heavy. I can let things hang and dry within those areas without any worry about it touching the ground or any of that business, right? But this whole setup compacts down into the little folded suitcase I showed in the beginning of this video, if you will. You know, and then, like I said, I'm going to work on better crates to kind of use with the gear. But the rest of it was just in a milk crate, you know, so definitely small footprint when it came to the amount of space it would take up in a vehicle. But hopefully this gives you an idea now of, you know, if you've watched previous videos of mine, I do a lot of solar generator stuff and a lot of solar powered stuff as well that can all be used off grid. So it's easy enough to turn around and take, you know, the solar generator that I'm using on the pump there and run that inside my camp and run a lighting system. Or I showed another build out of a USB generator system in previous videos that I've done that I like using for my lighting systems, where I can easily turn around and run USB lighting and hanging it off this hook and all that kind of business, and light up the area, give me a place to have a sink and countertops, give me I've even got a small mirror, I forgot to bring it with me, that clips on here to give you a mirror along with your soap and your hand towels and all that kind of stuff, right? Where kind of a quasi bathroom sink, if you will, that you can clean yourself up in and those types of things. And if you've watched previous videos of mine, I also have 12-volt cooking pots and those types of things. Now, given that the water pump doesn't need to be pulling off that 12-volt solar generator all the time, it's easy enough for me to just pop off the solar generator, hook on a 12-volt cooking pot, and supply myself hot water if I wanted hot water into the sink and that kind of thing, yeah? And I've shown out detailed videos about all my 12-volt cooking gear and that kind of stuff in past videos. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go check out those videos. They definitely have a lot to offer. But the only jimmy rig that I did here was I just stuck a little piece of wood in here because the slope, we're not sitting on a good level here. So I just put a piece of wood into this pipe to give it a little bit more friction when I want it to turn this, just so I can have it hold this in place a little better, yeah? But now, like I said, if you've watched a lot of my previous videos, it'd be easy enough to throw a butane stove on here, or if I'm using this in a wall tent setup or in my ice shelter setup, it's easy enough to turn around and throw in my titanium stove and that kind of stuff. And give me the full capacity now, where I've got, in essence, full functioning of a sink. You know, this is great for when you're off grid and you want to do it for the long term. The batteries I'm using in that solar generator are lithium iron phosphate batteries. Now, they're designed to last years and years and years. And the amount of power, yeah, it's a 80 watts water pump, but you're only turning that on for, say 3 or 4 minutes in an entire day. You're not even drawing anywhere near the 80 watts that would be consumed within a 1 hour period. You know, the actual solar generator itself is somewhere around 256 watts worth of power. So just that unit can run that generator, you know, for, I'm ballparking, for what, 3 hours non-stop. And typically you're only going to be running that at 5-10 minute stints at a go, you know, maybe 15-20. So when it comes to being able to run the water pump, you could do that for a really, really long time. And with that 80 watt solar panel constantly kind of adding back into it, you know, these are long-term options that could last you a long, long time. You know, when you're off grid, you could have a quasi-permanent water system that could last you, and from my perspective and belief, you could get well over 10 years worth of use out of something like this, daily use, without it being, you know, a concern in that regard. Now, when it comes to how I've done things out here, I wanted to stop and kind of state that, yes, this is kind of reliant on the water pump and solar panels and everything in the context of the example I've shown you here. But even if the solar generator, you know, went to pot and was no longer working, you know, I could run the solar panels directly powering the water pump. And I'll stop and I'll show that example now, yeah? So let's go back to the water pump. Okay, so let's say the scenario that this solar generator dies, circuits give, or fuses blow, or any of that kind of business, you know, and the battery's just pooched. I no longer can use it. But the solar panel is still working effectively. I have this unit, and I've shown this in previous examples in previous videos, where this is a buck converter that's designed to hook directly into solar panels. So I've got my MC4 solar connections here to feed the solar panels in. It feeds through this buck converter unit that converts it from the 18 volts coming off the solar panels and outputs it to a cigarette lighter adapter. So even if I wanted to scrap the idea of using batteries entirely in the solar generator, you know, in full, and just said, you know, screw it, I don't want to have any of that solar generator business attached whatsoever, it would be easy enough for me to turn around and take the buck converter system that I have here and use this instead, where I'll just step that away from the solar generator entirely, and maybe I'll even shift camera angles. Yeah, let me just tilt the camera over this way a bit. Hold on, just to kind of keep you guys in the scene. So I would recommend doing this with, you know, a 200 watt panel instead of an 80 watt, and overpowering your panel a bit if you're doing this kind of construct. But it would be easy enough for me to turn around and say, all right, let's connect the buck converter now directly to the solar panel system that I have. And now there is no battery involved in this setup. That's just straight lined off to that cigarette lighter adapter. And if I turn around and take the 12 volt water pumps, you know, cigarette lighter socket, and plug it in, hopefully the camera's picking that up. It's flashing because I'm not getting quite enough light at this location. Here, I'll shift camera angles and come in on this. I thought I'd just show a close-up of this now. So this is running directly off that solar panel. Like I say, there's no batteries involved here. I'm going straight through the buck converter, from the solar panels through the buck converter out to the cigarette lighter. But you can see it's a cloudy day and that kind of thing. I could probably position the solar panels to sit a bit better angle. I'll try to do that now, but I'm still not getting enough power to fully drive the water pump. And that's one of the limitations though, right? Of if I wanted to run this water pump with no solar generator batteries involved, I'd have to have good sunlight, and it would be better off to use even larger panels than this 80 watt that I'm using. And, you know, at least step it up to 120 watt or a 200 watt panel, you know, 190 watt or, you know, in that range kind of thing. And that way it would still work and function, but then I would only be limited to, oh, see, it's now gotten enough light energy to just start to give. So I still don't think there's going to be enough in that pump to run it, but it's worth a shot. You can see that little amount of solar panel energy. We're in a heavy cloudy day. It's not a huge amount of spray, but it's enough where I could supply the water and it would just be slower. You know, it just doesn't have the, I can even let that just sit and go. It just doesn't have the, and that's syncing with the pulsing of the light here. It just doesn't have the oomph, if you will, but it's still pushing through that full length of hose, right? Now it's one of those things where, like I said, I'll pan back and show now of how gray the sky is. It's not a sunny day. I'm not getting a lot of light in that regard. There's no direct sunlight coming into this location, and there's heavy cloud at this location, but it would still do the job. So, you know, as long as you're in the daytime where there was even this level of light, it might be a little slower, but I could still turn around. And like I said, I'm not hooked into the battery at all. None of this is hooked into the solar generator. This is purely just running off the solar panel. You know, there's nothing to it in that regard. But, you know, you set it on autofill and dump it into the water catchment container you have at the kitchen, and it's not going to work as fast. But even on a crappy day like today, I could use this without batteries for years and years and years and years and not have to worry about anything really. As long as the motor on the water pump held out, this thing could last a long, long time. But regardless of all of that, I'll stop and kind of do some finishing comments about, you know, even if this steps down into a primitive mode, the level of functionality you get, yeah? So, like I say, I'll wrap this video up because I know it's probably getting a little long. I tend to get wordy in my videos, I know that. But needless to say, I'll kind of stop and do some finishing comments about, you know, people are going to make comment about, yeah, you could run off the solar panels directly, but for how long is that pump going to last, and all those kinds of things. You know, fair enough, right, when it comes to all of those things. The good part about this core setup is really the only thing that's driving electricity in this entire setup is this faucet that sits here. You know, if I had to, it would be easy enough to turn around and switch it up. I'm just going to put the lid back on my water here. But if I had to, it'd be easy enough to switch it up and say, all right, ditch that faucet entirely, switch back down to having it where I was just running a water jug. And this water jug was able to feed into my sink. And I still had, you know, quasi the same level of functionality. Just slide that back a bit. And, you know, still get the same level of functionality, right? It's going to be a bit more manual process, and I lose a bit of my countertop space in that regard. But functionally, I'm still able to achieve the same things, ditching all the electricity and all the components that potentially could break, and shifting it back to simple water containers and this basic kitchen setup. You know, so if I want to dial it back and that kind of stuff, I don't lose any functionality other than this little faucet. And really, I just pull out that little rubber hose that sits in there. And in fact, I'm just going to let that run dry. I just pull out the little rubber hose that sits in there. And the only thing I lost in functionality in this regard is I now have a little tiny hole where the water hose used to feed through my board, if you will, which is minor, right? Minor inconvenience in my perspective. But the rest of this core functionality of this kitchen is still going to work, you know, fine in that regard. And like I said, if I've got secondary system running lights and those types of things, they can easily sit on here. You know, when it comes to creating disinfectant for water now I've talked about this previously in videos where there's USB powered hypochlorous acid generators, and what it does in essence is it takes salt water and you run a little electricity through it and it turns it into hypochlorous acid, which will disinfect large volumes of water. So I can turn around and run my little hypochlorous acid generator in a cup full of water or 2 cups full of water with a couple packets of salt in them and create enough hypochlorous acid to disinfect, you know, gallons and gallons and gallons of water. I could create enough of that to disinfect probably 10 of these easily, within ease, and it would still, the water would taste a little bleachy if I used too much, and I'd still have some left over. To give you an idea how efficiently that hypochlorous acid would disinfect volumes of water to this degree, so in my perspective, I sit back and say, if I'm filtering the water in that's coming off these creeks, and I'm a little concerned about, the pathogens that exist within the water, and there's any danger or risk of that to myself, normally I have salt with me in my camp. That's pretty standard, salt and sugar are some of the basics you have. But I would add a bit of salt to that same water, generate it, turn it into hypochlorous acid, and then to a container about this size, I would probably add in about 2 or 3 tablespoons to give you an idea of kind of the amount to the volume of water. And I would let that sit for a half an hour or so before I drank any of it. And I would feel confident in drinking it without it making me ill or anything else. It has a bit of a pool water taste. So, if you've swam at the public pools and you've gotten a bit of the pool water in your mouth, you know what that flavor tastes like. Hypochlorous acid kind of has that same flavoring to it. But it's way, way more effective than using bleach. There's bushcrafters that turn around and use pool shock and those types of things. In my perspective, those chemicals, if you use them in too high of a dose, and it can easily be too high of a dose, can be hard on your body, extremely difficult on your body. Using bleaches and those types of things, I think it's the FDA down in the States, has recommendations of how much bleach you should use in purification of water and that type of thing in an emergency situation. And I still see it as the hypochlorous acid is by far safer than that kind of option entirely. It's your body generates hypochlorous acid within yourself to help fight off infection and those types of things. So it's not some foreign substance to your body. Obviously, when it comes to anything, you have to worry about doses. But like I said, I'm of the approach of, if I had a container this size and I threw in 2 or 3 tablespoons worth of hypochlorous acid, that would be ample enough to disinfect this water of any pathogens, make it totally safe to drink. And if I'm anywhere near an ocean location, I can easily pull a bit of salt water and create large amounts of the hypochlorous acid and be able to create enough fresh water that was absolutely safe to drink for months, if not years, easily. This stuff is time sensitive. When you make hypochlorous acid, you want to use it, generally speaking, I would want to use it within the first 5 to 7 days of creating it, but it's easily made a resource that can be made off salt water. It's not a difficult thing to acquire or make, in my perspective. Even when you're up in the mountains, you can pull salt out of wood ashes and those types of things, and once you've extracted that salt, you could do the exact same thing and form the hypochlorous acid out of that. It's a little more complicated to do, but even when you're far away from the ocean, you can still get access to salt. You just have to have the knowledge of how to do that. But either way, this is my camp kitchen. It goes along with a larger project that I plan on doing, and that'll kind of come out in future videos where, like I said, I've already got all the technology together. I just haven't gotten around to displaying it all in a video. I want to probably do that in the ice shelter or something where I've got the ability to do off laundry, wash loads of laundry and all that kind of stuff. All off-grid, all easily portable. Everything I'm about to mention is within reason under 50 pounds, easily able to throw it in the back of a truck. But to be able to run showers, in fact, I'll even stop and kind of show you a sneak peek of that just because I have it here with me. I've got a portable shower that sits right here, and I never added this into the video. And let me see if I'm catching this on the camera right. Like I said, I know I always ramble, but this is a portable shower, and it's designed to go off 12-volt cigarette lighter adapters as well. So this would be part of my powered off-grid system, if you will, where I'm able to run showers, I'm able to do laundry, I'm able to run flushable toilets that have water flow and all that kind of stuff, and how to have long-term toiletries without being reliant on toilet paper as your main supply to kind of keep things clean and sanitary, if you will. Of all that stuff I've got coming in future videos. I just got to get more time. I had a window of a few hours today that I could kind of whip off this video and do this, but I really want to have a good weekend where the weather's nice and sunny, that I can get out and kind of walk through the shower, the laundry, the toilets, the full kitchen that you've seen here, and all of that set up to run long-term off-grid, you know, in any type of off-grid setup or bug-out environment, where you've now added on the creature comforts of water supply to your off-grid system. But if you enjoy this type of content, you know, like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching, yeah? Cheers. Just pull the drain and let the water flow around. I think I've got it locked up down in the bottom too. Like I say, if you don't know the workings of this sink, I go through that in full detail in previous videos. There you go. Oh yeah, I already popped the water. Like I say, the sink's just flowing out now, going through the garden hose. Gotta slowly pack all this stuff up, right? Get it back in the truck. But if you made it this far in the video, like I say, thanks for watching, guys. I know I kind of get into some unusual different stuff as I move through my videos and don't really stay on the same topic, but you know, it's to me it's all about self-reliance. Almost all my videos are centered around that kind of mindset, right? So if you see that there's varied content, it really, in the long run, other than my piano videos, which I know people don't like, I tend to lose subscribers when I do those, but I'm a pianist, it's part of my life, and I'm not going to bother making a separate channel for that. To me, I don't put out enough of those videos to make it worth the while. But either way, most of my videos are going to be centered around the idea of self-reliance and long-term survival and that kind of stuff. Of all the things you see in my different videos tend to center around that level of content. My channel started off as bushcraft, but then I realized that there can be on-grid or off-grid, or you know, bug in or bug out and all that kind of stuff. And it all connects back to the same concept of how are you going to be self-reliant and not have to rely on everybody else around you if everything goes to pot and you need to keep your life going, yeah? So either way, like I say, I know I keep rambling. Thanks for watching.